Today is episode 32. We're talking all about Peter Burwash and PBI, Peter Burwash International. Peter Burwash is one of our pillars. We've got a few more to go through, the pillars of the GreatBase. We say we've got 8 main pillars.
Yeah, we've covered 5. Or this will be the 5th. We covered Jim Verdick, Welby Van Horn, Bill Jacobson, Jim Lair.
Yeah.
Peter Burwash International. So that leaves Harry Hopman, Dennis Vandermeer, Vic Braden. You learn from so many people over the years, but
yeah.
When I ran this program for tennis teachers starting in 1981, that's what we've basically done is assembled information, ideas, and insights. And all these leaders are very much connected to the program. That was the first of its type.
Tennis Tech.
Tennis Tech, we'll make that a podcast.
Yeah.
Number 32, wow. 20 more and we'll be through the first year. And with getting through the first year, I think people have a very good idea of the history behind the GreatBase.
Yeah.
But, a game we play, one thing about getting up in years is have the kids can say one thing on a rainy day and in the gym, and I say, okay, say one thing and I'll tell you a story. 32, Jim Brown, Cleveland Browns. The number he wore in college at Syracuse University is a different story. But he was known as one of the toughest guys. And back in the 70s, he said he'd like to get in the ring with Muhammad Ali, the champ. And by chance, he did. Jim Brown walked into a hotel, and Ali, he didn't know that Ali was there, like boxers did in the day, and they set up the hotel lobby, and he was training. So Jim Brown jumped right in the ring, and he found out within just maybe 10 seconds that he couldn't stick the champ. I one time, a young guy, his father asked me to help him out. We were the same age. Anyway, he's a Golden Glove boxer. He had a lousy record. But I remember telling him I'd take him on, and he sat in a swivel chair, and the same thing I found out in about 10 seconds. I thought, it was, the guy's in a chair. I go, I got this. And
Got the high ground.
And I, boom. But Peter Burwash, yeah, let's get going. Your background with Peter, like so many of the coaches I've worked with, I would say is indirect. Like, so you have such a direct connection to Vic Braden, having spent so many years with him.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to go through this. Obviously, I've never had the opportunity to meet Peter in person, but learned through you. And obviously in the library here, we have a lot of material, a lot of books, tapes, cassette tapes to go through, which is great. I just remember, the first time I showed up in Tampa when we first connected years and years and years ago. I mean, my longtime background with Vic, so the information was there, but I just remember there was just so much application going on that I was able to learn, which was great. And that just comes from all these different pillars and obviously all the different coaches we continue to learn from, but all the different art form really to the application of oftentimes Braden information.
With Vic, you've heard me say this. I know you've repeated it, which I appreciate. Vic Braden's the Christmas tree, but the ornaments, Peter Burwash and Peter Burwash International, it would just be a very plain Christmas tree. I mean, it's amazing what he did for the curriculum that we put together. And it's really Peter and Peter Burwash International.
Yeah.
With going to a conference, Peter's always speaking at conferences. So that's the first time, and many times sat in lectures, but 60, 90 minutes just doesn't get it. I respect people who go to conferences. It's much better if you can go observe a coach. And even a week is a snapshot.
Yeah.
If people were to go a week and be able to circulate. But I started my journey in the mid-'70s. That's when I first heard Peter. He's 10 years older than I am. I'm 66. He's 76, give or take. He ran a camp for coaches where he grew up in Canada. It was actually in Parry Sound, Bobby Orr's hometown. Manitowoc, and there's also Manitou. There's a camp and a resort.
We hope everybody knows who Bobby Orr is, but if you don't,
Number 4, Bobby Orr. I don't want to go off into much of a tangent and digress, but unbelievable hockey player. So yeah, Parry Sound, Ontario, north of Toronto. With that, I never went. but I heard of Peter Burwash's camp for coaches. And it was commonplace back in those days to try to get the notes. I still have the notes. I have prepared 15 pages of notes just to talk about Peter and PBI. And that's without going through these weekend workshops that we have on video.
Yeah. No, we're going to break this up. Just so you know, we're breaking this up into 2 parts. So tonight will be part 1, and next week part 2.
So that means it'll only be 20 hours, 10 hours and 10, right?
10 and 10.
With just through that course, I think Peter had his name was recognized within the tennis teaching industry. I would consider, like our other mentors, that Peter's a pioneer. He was one of the first to put courses and camps together for training tennis teachers. I think most people, they just learned by playing the game, and they learned from perhaps the coaches they worked with or the local coach serving apprenticeship.
Right.
I know that you know this because you're spending so much time in our library, but we have audio cassettes.
Yeah.
And we have so many of Peter Burwash.
Yeah.
I lived in Van for 2 years. The first year going to tournaments, but the second year I went all over the country, went from one resort to the next, and had a nice sound system in the van, but really didn't play a lot of music. I played voices of coaches, and so it's fun to have you going through those and saving those tapes.
You had a cassette player, or was it a track?
It was a cassette player.
Yeah.
And 1974, I remember Peter saying, "I haven't said take your racket back since 1964." It used to just be take your racket back, take your racket back, racket back, racket back.
Yeah.
And when people have a solo movement, they just take their arm back, the racket back, and then they turn, and they end up having to swing 3-4 feet behind them.
Yeah.
In 1981, I had a chance to put this academic curriculum together, revised a general recreation program into a comprehensive tennis program. And Peter Burwash, he called me. I think that really defines Peter. He's a go-getter. He initiated, hey, I read what you're doing. I want to come up. And he did. He came up on his own nickel. It was not about, okay, how much money can I make? He just wanted to contribute. By that time, he had moved his operation from Honolulu, PBI. Peter Burwash International was based in Honolulu for years and years, but, or I should say Hawaii. But then he went to Houston. Bernard Guzman came with him. Peter's people skills, his ambition, the drive, his desire to make a difference. But it was in 1974 we set up his company, Peter Burwash International, better known PBI. It's still in operation. All our listeners need to do is go to www.peterburwashinternational.com. Still the largest company of tennis teaching pros in the world. Business card of his staff, PBI tennis specialists. They're far, far more than just tennis teaching pros. Primarily work at 5-star hotels all over the world. Obviously, the numbers would change, but a safe guess years ago is that Peter would have 100 tennis teaching professionals at 50 destinations around the world.
Let me just really quick just ask you, when he came to Tyler, Texas, that first time to Tennis Tech, and that was the first program of its kind, what were his thoughts? Was he impressed with what you were doing, or what was his kind of feedback? Like, wow, this is cool. Or
no, for sure, because it's in my notes that so few people had any formal training, clinical academic training for teaching, and his whole life has been dedicated to many, many causes, but one certainly isn't. A key word for tennis for Peter is was always trying to make tennis, the tennis teaching side of it. We're called pros, but are we really professional?
Professional, yeah. And he came back year after year, right?
Well, we'll get into that. PBI and his pro staff came back. So throughout the 1980s, and the students I trained during that time, I'm sure they'll get a kick out of listening to this.
You better be listening.
Better be listening. I was never on Peter's payroll. I never worked for Peter. I was honored to be offered a job by PBI without going through their extensive interview process. And you've already asked that, but it wasn't like they had just met me at a coffee shop. I get to meet a lot of the key staff members for years. The interview process they used to run, and Peter at one point, I'm sure it's even higher now, I interviewed over 10,000 people. And it wasn't interviewing people one-on-one. They would bring a group of people in. But it was over 3 days, about 15 hours.
Wow.
And through that, just my job when I started training tennis teachers was to find other people jobs. So the interview, Peter Burwash 101 is, I still say that to this day, life is an interview. Especially when you're a tennis teaching professional, it's almost like you're on call. You go to the grocery store, you're just going to run into people.
Yeah.
You actually have a public position.
Yeah, you're on stage a little bit.
Yeah. Peter, here's some statements. Tennis teachers used to dress like slobs. It's gone back down. Keep in mind, when I was training tennis teachers, they would be taking the PTR and the USPTA test and just how they presented themselves.
Yeah.
Another Peter Burwash, tennis teachers are one step above a beach bum. You don't want to show up like you're returning from a 5-day fishing trip. So our work with PBI gave us a leg up on the interview process.
Yeah.
So after he came on the initial visit, he would send a team of his coaches. Our coaches were trained, our tennis teaching professionals. When you're on an interview, show up semi-casual. So you're wearing a guy's going to be wearing khaki pants.
Yeah.
The light blue shirt. You got the blazer.
Yeah. Blazer.
You got a tie. So you don't come in wearing a 3-piece suit, but you show up with your tennis outfit in a small bag. Mm. Then you bring a small shoulder bag, 2 bags, shoulder bag for the tennis equipment, the gear to get on court, and then that shoulder bag where you're going to pull out 3 copies of your resume, and you're not going to just make all these mistakes. A lot of times people that they just knock on the door and, can I have a job?
Yeah.
They don't even set up the interview. Here are some things. You're riding to a restaurant. Generally, when you're being interviewed, it's going to be a couple of people in the car. So what you do is you follow the driver to the left side, and then you get in the back seat. And people go, why would you do that? Because what happens is people are being polite and say, well, why don't you ride in the front seat? Mm-hmm. So you just eliminate that conversation.
Yeah.
So I always think of Tom Fye when it comes to interviews, because Tom and I worked on the Vic Braden staff. Mm-hmm. He was a tennis director at Indian Wells.
Yeah, long time.
So another position he had, I can remember he had a mustache for the longest time. And if you get in the final 3, that's like you've won. Because if you get in the final 3, then it's just a flip of a coin. And the best person doesn't always get hired. Mm. But if you get in the final 3, you're doing quite well. So I remember Fye, he came because he was really into pro shop management. He came to our campus to train the students how to run a pro shop. So one of these, a weekend workshop back in the day, it was 25 hours. It was Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. It wasn't the week off. Mm-hmm. So I remember Fye going, well, I think I got the job because I didn't get any, French dressing on my mustache. With, as if, that became part of the conversation. You're going out to drink. Now, with Peter grew up in Canada, so he was a hockey player, so I'm sure he had a beer or 2, but he got to the point where no alcohol. But we used to tell our students, your choice, but don't be the first person to order a drink. Not during lunch. You don't want to have a drink at lunch, but at the end of the day, and your choice. So you order last, but if only one person's ordered a beer, iced tea, I'll have a beer. Is that you just say to the person, well, I'll have a beer with you. Don't you want to drink alone? And people laugh a little bit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can tell you some stories where we had some people that we trained that they had the job pretty much secured until then they went out for some drinks, and it's like ordering 2 at a time. Here's something coming back to Vic. Vic used to tell me, Steve, my pros show up 1 minute before the program starts, and they're just carrying a racket. Your coaches, the people you've trained, they show up. They've got a small shoulder bag. They're carrying a clipboard. They got a pencil in hand. They come a half hour early, and they're asking how they can help out.
Yeah, like Vic's Tennis College was so easy, really. I mean, you know, you had your court, you had a rotation, so it could be, yeah, not that really time demanding where you have to show up and really prepare. It's like, okay, where am I going? Oh, I'm teaching the volley day. Okay. I mean, I never did that, but I just,
you know, I think if Coach Verdick, you know, or you got to have a clipboard when you're watching a tennis match. You got to put your brains down. But when our coaches would get a compliment like that from Vic Braden, I would say, as our training from PBI, Peter Burwash International, that, you know, you were going to be professional and you're going to go beyond the call of duty. And the interview process, I was always so impressed by the quality of the people that PBI selected.
What about tucking in your shirt?
Yes.
Right? I don't think that happens. I mean,
you know, it used to be a collared shirt. You know, then t-shirts became a little bit more like a tennis t-shirt. You know, you can't wear a t-shirt that says Budweiser, that type of thing. After Peter's initial visit, the 3-day workshop, they covered topics from A to Z. And after the first few years, we were really allowed to submit to them what topics we would like covered. As the years progressed, you know, our expertise grew on the topic of on-court teaching and coaching, although the PBI organization was just so creative. But for the most part, our training was had so much to do without not hitting a tennis ball, you know, being a tennis professional.
Yeah.
So here's just a few things I wrote down, you know, like creating newsletters, bulletin boards, ladders, round robins, on-court theme clinics, socials with themes, calendar of events, court maintenance, court construction, court lights, you know, budgets, writing, speaking, you know, front desk management.
Really just running everything to run a club really well. Club program.
Yeah, as a tennis director, you know, how's it go? An assistant pro should be a head pro in waiting. You know, I had my lines where, well, you got an assistant pro haircut.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, well, you know, you don't know if you should have got the earring.
You got the bun.
You know, it was okay for John McEnroe, who was endorsing the Bic razor not shaving. You know, if you're a player, touring pro, you do whatever you want.
Yeah.
With, you know, Agassi wore an earring for a long time. But I said, unfortunately, people are going to judge you.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you want to wear an earring, that's great. I mean, but if you want to be employed too, if they're going to, so it just come in very neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, dealing with obnoxious hotel guests. I think you'd love this because your background in acting is they put us through improv.
Yeah.
You know, helping people with stage fright.
Yep.
You know, it's like plug in your personality. You know, I think people are one on either one side or the other where you have to pull them back like they're over the top and you got to get them to tone down.
Yeah.
Or the other way, get them to speak up.
I remember where Vic, you know, when they did questionnaires, brain typing questionnaires with teaching pros, it was like 85% were introverts. You know, I don't know if how accurate that was, but the majority, I think, are introverted, and you'll have to learn to extrovert, but that's the kind of the industry norm, I think.
Yeah, just to say good morning. The first thing you have to be able to do to be a tennis teaching professional is to be a greeter.
Yeah.
You have to say, hello, good morning, how are you today?
Yeah.
But, you know, and people, when I have a kid tell a clean joke, tell a story, sing a song, you know, that really comes from the training with PBI. It's how to get people out of their shell.
Yeah.
But I think it's always important to reflect and give ideas, you give credit where all the ideas come from. Because teaching pros are constantly in front of people. Constantly, all day long.
I think like a lot of the pros that I've met that you've trained as well, I think sometimes they don't, you know, we put Vic on such a high pedestal. We talk about Vic all the time, Vic Braden. But I think a lot of times I get the feeling that they don't even know where a lot of the information comes from.
Oh, no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. You know, I mean, Craig Tiley from that tennis tech program, you know, he certainly is the best known student. Rightfully so, and he has such a high profile position. But I was at the U.S. Open one year, and I think I mentioned that when we talked about Welby. is he went out and did the body balance positions, and he was around for so long that he would have a pretty good idea where the information came from. But if you didn't live it, I think that's the best thing about a book. We used Peter's written 19 books, I think. I have the notes. We used one of his books as a textbook, Tennis for Life. So with Peter, he traveled. I talked to Julian Krinsky, who's in touch with Peter. That he's not traveling like you used to travel 300 days a year.
A lot.
I think it's so smart for a CEO to be part of the interview session, with more things on that. Passing the endurance test. Interviews like life; it presents a number of tests. I still use some of the tricks, and people have heard this too. It's some of it is so original, but I do this with junior tennis players. You drop a pencil, and if they take 3 steps backwards. What they should do is, it's not playing head games with them.
Yeah.
You find out their energy level. No, they just may be shy.
Yeah.
But someone drops a pencil, you pick the pencil right. You pick the pencil up right away.
Yeah.
With planning a piece of garbage, keep in mind like 8 people are going to be interviewed at the same time.
Yeah.
And they all walk by the banana peel.
Yeah.
You see the banana peel, you can say, "Excuse me." You're walking on a sidewalk. You're talking to someone, stopping. Yeah. I always tell a story. It's amazing how these. I consider all 8 of these pillars as pioneers. One time it rained, and I was on a Tyler Junior College campus, and we had at the point where we had over 100 students. So we always had Jenkins 115 was always available, and so we got Dennis Vandermeer, and he goes, "Oh, we're going to go up and we're going to talk about doubles now." And so we go up, and all the students are ahead. Dennis and I are walking behind, and his staff too are walking ahead. So we're walking, and I stop, and there's somebody, McDonald's wrappers aside, like, "Excuse me," and I just go over and pick him up. And so Dennis went up to the lecture hall, and he didn't talk about doubles. He just started talking about work ethic.
Yeah.
Dennis, we'll talk about Dennis. But Dennis and Peter are so much in common, just with it's really principle with the work ethic. Well, it's not my job. It's not my job to pick up the pencil. It's not my job to pick up the garbage.
You can kind of see pretty fast who's entitled or who's not.
Yeah, you don't want to judge people on something like that, but you're just trying to read a person, and that's, to me, I could just go on over and over on interviews. I talked to so many club owners and said, "Well, really, do you just want to have them fly to your place and you're going to talk to them? Why don't you fly here and meet them right here?"
Yeah.
And to make that happen.
Yeah.
Signs of being lazy, as you said, entitled. But they were trying to find people who could go beyond the call of duty, exceed expectations. Mm-hmm. Random people come in and go, "Well, I work for Peter Burwash. I work on the other side of the world. I'll be working at a beautiful 5-star resort." He would do things like, maybe it was just one letter that was handwritten in Portuguese, or maybe it was 8 people, 8 different letters. And this was before the internet.
Yeah.
And, people are, the class or the interview for the first day is over, and he goes, "Oh, and here's say if you were being interviewed, here's a letter if you'd bring it back translated tomorrow." And, then you've got to think on your feet and go throughout the hotel, and, you got to find somebody who speaks Portuguese.
Yeah. You can't just go to Google Translate.
Yeah. Just a couple of years ago, I went to a Shark Tank. Of course,
not to an actual Shark Tank.
Yeah, the course. A course that's owned and operated.
Yeah.
And they gave us an assignment. It was to see how much credit you could get. Of course, I was the oldest one. At my age, usually I'm the oldest person in the room, and so I
definitely
had to call, and so I won a $50 gift certificate for
nice.
To get the most credit, because they were saying on some things you don't want to borrow money. It's like, well, you don't want to go in debt either. So you get people, they're tired, and it's like, okay, at the end of the day, it's like, well, if you do this tonight, to see how they can react, and they're exhausted, and can they go the extra yards, and
a little bit of a test.
Go without sleep and food.
Yep.
Reminds me of Roberto Cala, who's not from Bolivia, he's from Peru. We had a young guy working with us, and we were really busy, and the young guy said, "What about lunch?" Roberto just started laughing. Lunch. There are some days where you don't even think about lunch.
Where do you think a lot of this, from Peter's background comes from? His upbringing.
Well, we'll get into that. I think, he was an ice hockey player, and then he traveled all over the world. He did it on a shoestring. And so for Peter to put together PBI, I think it comes from just how you're brought up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, he played high level hockey.
But I think that culture, right? I mean, hockey with some toughness and some grit.
But I think also, just seeing how it works, Peter, by traveling the world, he saw first-class service. He put PBI together. I think he started when he was 30 years old. I think
hanging out at 5-star resorts or hotels, you're going to see some good service.
Yeah.
You're going to see a high level.
But I just think the way someone's wired as far as principle, his energy level, I think it's just all encompassing.
Yeah, I've seen a few of his tapes where a great presenter.
Thinking outside the box, trying to always make things better. So he shows up at the campus and he challenges me. And Canadians are very polite, and Peter very graciously had me stand in front of the students and gave me a challenge and said, "Well, you're not going to have much time to think about it." And he went through, you can think on your feet, and ended up not being much of a challenge. Would have been better if it was something a little bit different, because he said, "Steve, you can just walk around the court one time or go in the corner for a minute and come back, because what you have to do is you have to take some of the students off the bleachers and train them as ball boys." And it wasn't too many years before that I was working in Stowe, Vermont, and I was put in charge of training the ball boys. It's the most nervous I've ever been around. The Saturday, Sunday, the matches are on TV, and the ball boys were very young, and I was very nervous because it was like they could mess up. And that's digressing. That's one way to there's teaching pros and there's touring pros. The touring pros, some of them are not too nice to the ball kids, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
This, I think will come back to what you just asked. With training pros, Peter helped me so much. It was all about principles. It's just how he flies. Life gives you the test first, lesson second. His very experiences here too. This comes from Peter Burwash, so certainly I said, well, this was my idea, but really, I think that's a too egotistical statement. This is my idea. We've all been in meetings where people say, "Hey, you got to make the person think it's their idea, or it won't happen." But the influence. So I had a lot of students who were a little cocky between the ages of 18 and 23. They thought they played and they thought they even taught at a much higher level than they actually did. So the very first couple days, we would film them hitting the tennis ball. So we recorded that. But we also had them go into a room. And again, this is PBI training, PBI influence, I guess I should say. So we put in a hat, there's just 8 pieces of paper: serve, forehand, backhand volley, backhand volley.
Yeah.
And then you have to stand up on a desk, and then the camera's pointing at you.
Yeah.
And you say you have 3 minutes just to explain. And say, for example, if it was the serve, I mean, you're just trying to capture humility.
Yeah.
Because people will come back and they'll act like you never taught them anything. That's one of the reasons to this day where we'll have an assessment. People aren't going to come back and go, "Hey, you ruined my game."
Yeah. I got it on film.
But the 3 minutes was a long, long time. Most of the students, they couldn't go a minute. And if it was the serve, almost everything they said was wrong. But just to capture that, check your ego at the door. And I do think that comes back to hockey as well as on the tennis side of it. The coach is charging fees, and young hockey coaches, old hockey coaches, when they first start out, they're volunteers. So anyway, just people, I think, jump into tennis teaching right away, and they're being paid, and they haven't paid their dues.
Yeah.
But like on the serve, you'd hear down together, up together, toss high for more times. The same things you hear today: scratch your back, arch your back, snap down, step for more power.
I think I've used this. I know when we were directing some programs, we've used this as in the hiring process. Is someone comes in and you just go, okay, teach me the forehand, teach me the backhand, teach me the serve, just on the spot. So they don't have a chance to go and try to prepare anything. It's like, hey, let me just see what you got. So you see where they're at as far as their knowledge, and then also the presentation skills.
Oh, I've gone places where doing a workshop for a club, and they've got, say, 10 pros. Ideally, I like to have all 10 filmed before I get there and make a video for them.
Yeah.
Then what you want to do to create teamwork, everyone's going to have their own style, but they have continuity, consistency from one coach to the next, and say, okay, we're all going to make videos. Don't tell me what you think, tell me what you know.
Yeah.
Here's another thing from Peter's influence, the Tiebreaker Test. The first job I had, I worked quite a bit as a volunteer, but the first job I had was at a camp, All-American Sports, and there was a 6-ball drill. And I felt like an auctioneer. I felt like someone who was announcing the horse race. A cross-court forehand, and a cross-court backhand, and a down-line approach shot, a cross-court volley, and an overhead.
Yeah.
And I just stopped and thought, I was so young, I was just like, all I'm doing is announcing what shot they have to hit, not telling them how to hit it.
Yeah.
But we put that to a test. So we have this comes from Peter Burwash, is breaking the court into 4 quadrants, numbering the quadrants, and having them be targets. And he's so creative, where we did that with you and Matt Clora the other day, where one player comes, like, you come out and you sit on the tee, you're sitting down, just sitting on your fanny, and I feed you a ball.
Yeah.
And we have kids, one kid in quadrant 1, one quadrant 2, 3, 4. So it's just the service boxes area behind.
Yeah.
That's PBI training. Sitting down, okay, you have to keep the racket head above your wrist.
Yeah.
You make it a game, it's fun. Then you're trying to teach little kids how to catch.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the kids love that drill.
Yeah.
They're just sitting there trying to catch.
Yeah.
But you as a volleyer have to have that racket control. So that's something we'll get into the teaching, but Peter was huge on racket control. So you just take ideas. Okay, this 6-ball drill, it really didn't have any training to it, any educational merit. But then Peter with his quadrant training. So then I came up with the idea, but the influence. So we have the Tiebreaker Test, and most of the time in my career, I was listening to Vic. Traveled, did so many different things with him. But one of our students, Jeff Lewis, set it up where, Vic and I were doing it together. He would do a segment, I would do a segment. And I remember Vic just loving the Tiebreaker Test, because some kid can come in.
That was here in Kissimmee, right?
Yeah, years ago. He would come, it was great. I was living in Tampa, but Vic would, for about 10 years.
Yeah.
He would come to Orlando at least 3, sometimes 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Run a camp. So some kid can be ranked, top 20 in their section, and they're 07. So it's not you got to just have a benchmark. And I remember...
you do it with pros too. I mean, it helps. Just go, see? You still got a little work to do.
But a line from Jack Kramer, the kid's got no game. So Vic had a very difficult time. He was such a nice guy. He said, I wanted to let them know right away. And Vic really liked that, but that wouldn't have been his personality. He'd be in the back room going, what game? That kid's going to be happy to find the bathroom. Yeah. It's kind of like using the rowboat in the middle of the ocean. He couldn't put the basketball in the ocean. Okay, this comes back to Peter, 2-sport athlete. Hockey was his first sport. Grew up in the Great White North. So that's where summer usually falls, like one day in July. I mean, it's short summers. He was good enough to play at the University of Toronto when they were there. They won the Canadian Nationals. I mean, I never saw him play hockey, but he had to be a very, very hockey player to play at that level. 5'9", 150 is a good guess. A red left wing. In tennis, he was called the Flying Canadian. He was diving on hard courts, so acrobatic before Becker was born. Becker came on the scene. Famous point at Wimbledon where Becker bounces twice. He jumps twice. He falls, but then it's a let court, and then he jumps the second time. You can find it on YouTube. It's amazing. So with Peter, I started at age 12. You certainly get to read a lot about Peter by reading his books. So he didn't play hockey year round. But hockey really makes somebody a well-rounded athlete. You know, they're going to have to, you got to deal with dexterity with your feet. You're on a pair of skates. You know, that's where someone learns to ski or skate. You think about all the people who've learned to ski, snow ski, is every pulse, you could fall on your face, every little millisecond you're out there.
Yeah.
So in hockey, you get to the point where you're going 30 miles, 35 miles per hour. It's not a contact sport, it's a collision sport. And what you're told the whole time from day one when you start playing hockey is keep your head up. Because if your head's down, you're going to get hit.
Yeah.
So he actually, penalty box was open, and it was just a bad accident where Peter was checked and the door of the penalty box was open. He ended up being paralyzed, which was frightful, but it only ended up being like half a day.
Wow.
Where in the hospital, couldn't move his legs. But he decided that it was such a violent game. And back then, there was only 6 hockey teams, the original 6 in the NHL. So people were actually making a living. So he made the decision to try to become a pro tennis player versus a pro hockey player. He played from 1967 to 1974, won 19 titles, 1971.
On the tour.
On the tour. Yeah. 1971, he was the best player in Canada, ranked number 1. He represented Canada in Davis Cup. There was no computer for singles ranking until 1973. There was no computer points or any ranking until 1978. In 1974, Peter was ranked 240 on the ATP Tour. But he played against so many great players. He had limited success against great players. But you know how that works. You got to go through qualies, and all you got to do is go to his Wikipedia page. He played against a lot of great tennis players. But first and foremost, he was a hockey player, and starting at that age and not playing full time, obviously it's amazing how well he did. But as a player, played to 71 countries. And you asked that many of the tournaments back in those days were held at resorts. It wasn't like there was big stadiums and TV coverage. So I think it's a no-brainer that experience, and obviously he liked it, loved traveling.
Yeah.
I think that Peter Burwash is, I think he would win this hands down as the most well-traveled person. I think it's 137 countries he's been to. I asked one of our students who you know quite well, Raven Klaassen, because Raven from South Africa has been to just about every African country. And a lot of people haven't traveled throughout Africa. So I once asked him to count a few years back, and he wasn't close to 174. Now, I know I've taught it in over 137. Yeah, thanks. I've
asked me to help you every once in a while.
Yeah, I need it.
So I've just go for the 137, 174 is
senior moments. 137, it's like the speed of your serve. It's good. I've taught tennis over 30 countries, but in comparison to Peter, I feel like I never left home. I think this is interesting. Peter was a player, but he became a tennis manager, owner, operator, entrepreneur, whatever you would label CEO. He knew that being a player was just a bonus.
Yeah.
And so unlike most organizations, Peter didn't make the mistake of hiring people based on their playing background.
I was talking to a guy today about that topic, that he wants to get into coaching. And I said, well, just so you know what you're up against, you got to study content, get educated, but people are going to look at either who you've worked with or how you played, what you were ranked. So.
No, I tell you, so many influences from Peter and PBI. I went to great lengths. To make a curriculum change, it used to be something like 7 signatures and 8 committees. if you wanted to change, business law to, whatever.
In academia, you're saying?
In academia.
Yeah.
So you wanted to drop business law and add another course that was similar.
Yeah.
But I went to great lengths to have this academic program I was running become selective. Where only take 24 students and you had to be a 4.5 player. And, but I changed that. It was, and Peter was an influence because, he was hiring people that weren't great players. And, Vic used to always say that, for sure, players have to be selfish and be wrapped up in your own game, but you want to get to the point where you're really wrapped up in someone else's game.
Right.
I remember asking Fred Stolle one time. A friend of mine was working for Fred Stolle, and I got to spend a lot of time watching Fred work. And I said, Fred, it seems like all the time you play, every time you teach, you're hitting balls. He goes, yeah, I'm working on my game, mate. I'm still playing. So anyway,
yeah.
With what Peter would do, I mean, obviously through his interview process and being a great judge of character. And he says that you can play tennis with someone for 5 minutes and have a pretty good idea about their character. I've heard this said, I think it's so well put, is that you could talk to somebody for an hour every day, or if you played tennis with them for an hour, you'll know more about them if you play tennis with them for just 1 hour than talk to them every day.
Was it Steve Johnson Sr. that said tennis doesn't, he said it.
Steve Johnson, I love Steve Johnson Sr.
Character.
Yeah, I was honored that he was studying or he was a fan of our curriculum because I was out at Indian Wells and he came right up to me and said, hey, can I sit with you today? Okay. I mean, he didn't know much of an honor that was for me. But Steve Johnson, Sr., tennis lets you know who you are.
Yeah.
Tennis lets you know who you are.
Reveals your character, yeah.
Many times the place makes the pro. The pro doesn't make the place.
Right.
Let me say that right. The place makes the pro. So it's a really fancy 5-star hotel, and okay, you got your name and lights.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you can have it be where the pro makes the place, you're at a place where they got a few beat up courts, and you're making it work.
Right.
But what Peter did was he would train the pro first and find the place second. He wasn't going to take on new opportunities until he had people trained to do that.
Yeah.
And I'd say he was first in the placement of pros, but there's many companies that faded away because they went just the opposite of PBI. And I was in a position where I was training coaches, so I was dealing with these companies, these makeshift companies, where they're certainly trying to take money off the top, take percentages. Say, okay, we're going to try to run all the country clubs in this one area. Yeah, all the Memorial Day to Labor Day tennis clubs. And they've got the jobs, but they don't have the pros. So actually, they've really sold a bill of goods. They can't. They've overpromised and they're going to underdeliver. But Burwash, he was not going to do that. Yeah. Peter's statements: 95% of teaching pros have never taken one course on how to teach. So some of these things from our library are quite old, but I think that still would stand. Yeah, that statement would still stand today.
Evergreen.
Just because you can play, it doesn't mean you can teach. The training with Burwash, 450 hours of training. Most places don't have any training. They say, okay, we hired you, go to court 17, go to court 7, you're teaching. Yeah. Approximately 150 hours of that were training people on the court. They back in the day had to be able to shoot photographs, but also develop the film. You wanted
in a dark room.
In a dark room.
Wow.
You wanted students to be bilingual within 2 years, trilingual within 5 years. This was on an individual basis, but people had to come back for 90 hours of training. They had an annual, and I don't know if they still do, have an annual PBI convention. That all the pros, so obviously it's a big undertaking because they're working on every continent, all over the globe, and so they would have a convention with the pros who visit our campus. As I mentioned, truly outstanding. Bruce Hasse usually ran it. Others were, Bernard Guzman, I mentioned, Dan Aubuchon, John Murray, Chris Dyer, Joe Denoffer, Sandy Hastings. I remember Dan telling me about one convention where he had to, study Vic Braden materials, books and tapes, and then he had to debate. That's how much respect they had for Vic. He was going to debate the PBI pros. So, I told Dan, I said, "Well, I'm sure you did a good job, but I think Vic would have done a little better job."
I just looked back at that name, Joe Denoffer. Isn't that he runs on court, off court, right?
Yeah, I'd say his daughter Kalindi is, Joe's my age, Buffalo, New York guy. He spent years and years working for Peter, but his daughter Kalindi is running. I mean, I'm sure he's still there. I've actually, been in his office and spent time with him out in Dallas, where he's based. Most get-togethers with pros, talk about the PBI conventional. People used to tease, say, "What are you guys going to do? Get together out in Hawaii and drink fermented pineapples?" But a lot of times the pros get together and they're there for a tournament. They're there for the bar. I think a lot of times it sounds doom and gloom, but many times it's the same headliner. Yeah. It's the same content, same presentation with a different title. Yeah. I think so many words to define Peter. I would say energy would be a good one. PBI, just so creative. Doug Cash, who's a half a century in tennis, the tennis business. He'd be someone who'd be great to get on our podcast. Again, listeners, we got to get through this first year going through, the educational merit behind our curriculum. Doug has a great word for tennis pros, pizzazz. I mean, I think like Vic Braden, like Dennis Vandermeer, Peter, great pizzazz.
That's some pizzazz.
But just it wasn't false. I mean, he just
passionate energy.
What's the name of the bunny, the battery, the Ever Ready battery?
The Energizer bunny keeps going.
Where you can hold an audience attention.
Right.
I'll put it up on Facebook. It's kind of buried on YouTube, but there's a 90-minute presentation of Peter Burwash on nutrition. I think with nutrition, it'd be certainly great to listen to it in that regard, from that standpoint. But just to get a feel for Peter, he's a great speaker. Didn't make money off his pros company, didn't take a salary, made money off his presentations, money off his books, his articles. I mentioned it's 19 books. We have several in our library. Only 2 are on tennis, Tennis for Life, Tennis Aerobics. His last book, the title is Dear Teenager, If You Only Knew. And it's pretty heavy, though, with a lot of issues, but teenage suicide. Another one, Who Cares? It's kind of a wake-up call for service and leadership. I think if Peter would write another book, if he wants to make it an even 20, he's got a great line. What the public buys. Just think about what the public buys. And I'm always telling people that most consumers in tennis, they don't have consumer knowledge.
Right.
Most tennis coaches, unfortunately, they don't have product knowledge, but they know what they're selling. I think that Peter has a great BS detector. With
bull stuff.
Yeah, I do think with anybody we talk to, I think that's where we certainly can come across is, like people don't understand, whether it's tennis technical snobs. To me, if people don't have a Braden background, they're missing the details. The only people that I've ever met in all my travels in tennis that truly know, like, for example, how the loop is formulated on the serve, they have a Braden background. They either directly, indirectly were influenced by someone who worked with Braden.
Yeah.
Perhaps the best book for the tennis teachers is just leadership. But his book, Tennis, his main tennis book, Tennis for Life, came out in 1981. We use it as a textbook. Here's a short list of the key points. One is unstuck. And Peter really taught with all these concepts. I think coming back to Braden, it was just more like, here are all these facts. But tennis teaching is both an art and a science. So Peter, we talk about application.
You try to get people unstuck, you're saying?
There's knowledge, and then there's applied knowledge, applied information. But it's really the personality of the pro. It comes back to that pizzazz. That how do you relate? He's a master communicator. But people get stuck in the mud. It's like they've been at the same level for so long.
3-0 for 15 years.
But even like, say, a junior tennis player, I mean, they're in the million time club. You keep telling them the same thing. I heard a parent say the other day, and I think this is great. So I hear something, I just try to lock it in. And, I've heard people say this, but the way he said it, he said, well, winning's a drug. And people want to reinforce winning, so they keep doing the wrong thing. And it really applies. His daughter has got to reinvent her game because very athletic, hardworking, but just 11 years old. But, she worked with one of our coaches for just a month and a half. What we would say technically is the game was a train wreck.
Yeah.
But
I had this conversation today as well. The WTA versus the ATP forehand, which not fans of, but why do all these girls or women have these longer backswings? And there's not as many as people think, but it just goes back to, they have a long backswing because they have a long backswing. They've been doing it since they were really young, and they're programmed. They try to hit the ball too hard, most likely, with full Western grips. But if you don't get out of it when you're young, you're programmed. You have a motor program for that, and it's going to be stuck. And I'll see people online through social media, and you can see they're on their way. They're hitting the ball pretty well, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. But you just see these backswings that are really big, and you just go, I guarantee you're not going to grow out of it, which a lot of people think they will. It's like you're going to have that when you're 18, 19.
Yeah, it's like Sloane Stephens, what a great athlete, U.S. Open champion. I mean, be able to tell our grandchildren, wow, won one of the biggest tournaments in the world and one of the biggest courts in the world. Her backswing goes way behind her, but, or she's still young. Hopefully she wins more, but maybe she'd have more at this point.
Yeah, I made the point too.
More major titles.
Like a Novak Djokovic, he was up to number 3 in the world with a very inefficient swing on a serve.
And forehand. He had problems on his forehand.
Yeah, and made changes. So, why do people have technical flaws? Well, they've been doing it for a long time, since they're kids, and no one got them out of it.
Well, in this age of political correctness, I mean, it was so unfair for women for so long, but I think women should be offended by saying, well, that's a WTA forehand versus an ATP forehand.
You're basically saying you're hitting the ball like a girl.
And I don't understand these courses.
The ball doesn't know.
Capitalism's not perfect, and I think anything to sell tennis is, why are we having these courses on how to teach women when it comes down to the ball doesn't know whether it's being hit by a male or a female.
Yeah, maybe that just from a mental emotional aspect, but
but even too, as far as coming back to PBI training, definitely there's a place for it, but I don't think with ball striking, when it comes down to
no, not at all.
The interview process and how unfair that can be. I remember it was Jennifer Roberts, who's now Jennifer Morgett. She was working around the clock, and she was deserving. She has been the assistant coach at Kansas, and Tyler Junior College had a very impressive junior college tennis team. They needed to have a coach, and I recommended her, but there was no way at that time that they were going to hire a female. That's changed. I think I was in Tennessee with Austin Krajicek, and Pat Summitt wasn't very healthy at the time, but I asked these people that were helping us so much, and nice family, and I said, do you know Pat Summitt? Well, we're really good friends with Pat Summitt. So the next day, the evening I spent with the tennis team, and then afterwards with the coach at Tennessee. Pat Summitt, she was offered the job to be the men's coach. I mean, that's the way it should be. It shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But coming back to his book, just some of the key things: unstuck, awarenesses, self-awareness, court awareness, ball awareness, racket awareness, aware of the elements. So I always tell kids around the world, people are playing move up, move down. Junior tennis players never, it's a strong word, they never ask, when you move up or move down, how do you determine who takes which side? The wind can be blowing, obviously the sun could be in there, it could be on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Even though courts run north and south, they could have the bad side with the sun. A senior player plays that, and they ask right away, well, how do you determine what's just spin the racket. You aware of the score, common sense. I think one thing that Peter did so well is opposite hand. We were always telling people, hang onto the throat of the racket, say you're a righty with your left hand, fingertips, put the left index finger in the racket face. So just
non-dominant hand.
Non-dominant hand. And it's obviously a detail. It's not, it's not going to make or break someone's, say, backhand volley or their overhead. But sensory perception, when you're looking forward, you have a better idea of where that racket is.
Yeah.
Again, moving the racket.
When the racket gets beyond your peripheral vision, Vic used to talk about this a lot, you lose kinesthesis or feel. So you can kind of have an idea of where you are, where it is in space.
Checkpoints for each stroke. His book, Tennis for Life. You think about this, so the book was written in 81. I was I was in a coaching class not too long ago, and one of the leaders of the course was going to show something that was on YouTube, and what popped up was Dennis Vandermeer. It could have been Peter Burwash. It was an old tape, and it was at the 70s. And so the leader of the course just looked at the screen and said, "Oh, that's so 70s." And I didn't know exactly what he meant. Maybe it was the rackets or the short shorts.
Yeah.
No, I think large tennis organizations, large tennis clubs, multiple pros, really could turn the clock back. Dave Anderson, who we interviewed, he said that great theme for tennis would be Back to the Future.
Yeah.
And the professional training that Burwash helped us with. So some of the words they surface with so balance, Welby Van Horn balance. With pre-strategy, game strategy, post-strategy. Peter really gets into teaching athleticism with all these creative drills based on triple vision, but, the ball, the racket, your opponent, there's many things you have to do. Covers fitness, covers nutrition. One story with Peter on nutrition, this sums up Peter Burwash as well. So his company's based in Hawaii. He's on the beach. He's throwing a Frisbee. The Frisbee, by chance, hits someone who's sitting down. He approaches a gentleman to apologize, but he can't just apologize. He talks to him. And the gentleman was in Hawaii to conduct a program on nutrition. Mm-hmm. So Peter goes to that, and I think it's maybe 50-50 all the times that he's spoken. I think of tennis, certainly you talked about service and management, but I would think that he talked as much about wellness and health as he has his forehands and backhands. On teaching, you could tell me where we can stop here on part one, part two. But
I think
we're okay right now. Go a little bit longer.
We're pretty close.
Pretty close?
Yeah.
On teaching, long list of positives. I would say, just like with the Spanish system, and I don't want to sound like a cheerleader. If there was one negative, it would just be that, the PBI guys, just like the Spanish training I've been through 3 times, be a little more scientific. Not again with a lot of PhDs. That stands for piled higher and deeper. I know I respect someone who goes through all the hurdles to be honored with a PhD, but many times people are in the wrong lane, and they just really haven't logged any hours in the trenches. So a little bit on teaching. The first time hosting Peter, he asked who had a shaky forehand. And I put my hand up, so did several of my students. I was selected first, and Peter proceeded to give me a lesson. Like almost everybody at that time, I had been told that tennis was a one-grip game. So I had a continental grip on the forehand. I nudged it over a little bit, but I just hadn't got it where it should be. Yeah. I was, pushing the palm down. That was what someone like Vic would say, I'll never forget, first time I went to a Braden course, a gentleman was there and he had a continental grip on the forehand. And 6 months later, I found a way back there 6 months later. The same guy was there and he jumped on the court and he wanted help with his forehand. Real extroverted guy, and Vic didn't say anything about the grip. And I raised my hand and said, why aren't you telling him to change his grip? And Vic said, I'm not a toad. He was here 6 months ago. He didn't change his grip. Yeah. Now he's back. Now I'm giving him plan B.
Yeah, I told him. He didn't do it.
And
let's try something else.
Yeah. So I was a toad too. I didn't go cold turkey. So Peter's giving me a lesson, and it wasn't a semi-Western, but just told me to get my hand on the bottom of the third panel. And I would just think about, being with Welby Van Horn in his, not a nursing home, extended care. He lived to be 94 years old, so I'm with him, and he's in his 90s, and we're watching Roger Federer play. And the Welby Van Horn system, certainly one flaw was he called the grip for children, the Eastern grip, the beginner grip, and then they got older, he called it the championship grip. But at that time, kids were playing with a wooden racket, playing on bad grass in 3 out of the 4 majors.
Yeah, exactly.
But just like a million other people is that had the wrong grip on the forehand side. Peter, on teaching, we don't teach form, we teach understanding. I tell my students, nicely, I would say, you just need to shut up and listen. This guy has so much experience. Then, certainly later his organization, but have respect, show respect, be open to learning, because the overall approach is teaching people to understand form. So it can be a play on words. Peter was, we don't teach form, we teach understanding. And then we said, well, what we do is we teach people to understand form. From a teaching standpoint, I mean, he did spend some time with coaching Serena and Venus. He worked with a Canadian he left Canada and represented England, Greg Rosetsky.
Yeah, Rosetsky.
Andrew Schneider. He was actually coaching Sebastian Leroux with Daniel Mester. He won the 2000 Olympics. Our teaching curriculum is filled with content and concepts from PBI. Yeah. Defensive, neutral, offensive, good volleying position, ideal volleying position, left-hand awareness. We went through that from his book, but then there's all sorts of ways that, you try to work with people with self-awareness, court awareness, the elements, and then the triple vision, the position of the opponent, the ball, your racket.
Can you go through triple vision a little bit?
There's a chapter in his book. When I think of Peter Burwash, like say a half volley drill, this is not necessarily triple vision, but he'll make people where they don't have visual acuity, they have to run around the cone, so they can't see the ball coming to them. Yeah. Right before they turn, they feed the ball.
Yeah,
feeds the ball.
We've got that drill up online.
With
find it.
Having people turn around, and then you just toss 2 balls, and they have to catch the ball right-handed, left-handed, and then they're going to turn around, and then you're going to throw the 2 balls, and then they have to switch their hands. So the triple vision really comes from the emphasis that tennis is not simple, and you have to really deal with the ball, the racket, and your opponent. He started teaching as a teenager, coached Pee Wee football as a volunteer. So he started early on and being a great communicator. I was living in Canada where 2 boys were playing ice hockey. I made arrangements to be based in Toronto because of that. But I listened to Peter many times. I'd be at some hockey rink watching a tennis match, CBC, TSN. As a commentator, I'm very critical of commentators. Paraphrasing Peter, one can only exploit a weakness if they have the skills to do so. I'm baffled by the lack of options. They're just, all people could do is bang a forehand.
Yeah.
Does anybody think outside of the box anymore? It's just the way tennis is being played. I think there's reasons for that because people start winning at an early age, going back to what the parent was telling me. Yeah, tennis is a drug, and this is how they won when they were 9, so that's how they played when they were 10, and they only go to the net to pick up balls and shake hands. On teaching, a high percentage of people I've trained are not really open to listen to others, and I think that's really wrong. Learning new ways to teach tennis is work. And, some people, Burwash will say, okay, some people have 30 years experience, but they've only taught one way. They're not looking to change what they do. So they really, it's not, do they really have 30 years experience or do they have 1 year experience 30 times?
Right.
For example, even to this day, I think that, with Braden, we tell our students, we wouldn't want people to have hero worship for, okay, well, Vic was the only person to listen to. Because when people that I trained would not be open to listening to others, I would say that means you really didn't get Vic Braden. Because, Vic was constantly looking to change in how he taught. I have a film of Vic teaching in the 60s. Tracy Austin, she did so well. And, Vic had a big influence on Tracy, her family, her mother ran the pro shop at the Jack Kramer Tennis Club. And I remember Vic would always say, when I was teaching Tracy, I didn't really understand how the serve worked. So, no ego really.
Yeah.
But I think Peter is an artist, the top shelf communicator. On systems is an organized plan. It's not just a word. Experienced teachers like Peter, they're just not one-dimensional. To have the same approach, you can't have the same approach for every lesson, every individual. And that came back to the PBI training. With certainly many of my students, you say, okay, give a lesson, and you can only speak one word. Give a lesson, you can't talk. From Peter Burwash, it's so creative that we would critique Vic Braden, for example, with no sound. Watch his tapes, no sound. And it was very easy to do years ago with the TV. There was just one dial where you could darken the photos, so there's no picture.
Yeah.
So then all you're doing is hearing the sound. And with Vic would such a positive guy, but he says the word no all the time. And Vic would be at a conference, and you get somebody to hit the ball better, and he would say, yes, but that's not it.
Yeah. No, that's called your waist, or
yeah. Pet the Chihuahua. No, you were just petting the Great Dane. With design lessons for the player's needs, ask questions. This is a rookie teaching tennis. If you start teaching someone a lesson and they're playing a match the next day, asking people how much they can practice. With the difference between over-teaching and under-teaching. PBI training. And again, we have so much of this on video as well. So we would take the videos, the people who ran those programs, and we'd make assignments out of it. And, kids had the option to, I shouldn't say kids, students would be able to, we had a room set up where they could go just watch segments of the workshop. Have lesson plans. If you've been teaching tennis 10 years, you don't need to have a lesson plan. You get to the point where you already have a built-in guideline.
Yeah.
So many people, Burwash would beat up on people for saying, are you really going to start every lesson the same way? Mm-hmm. Are you really going to have people go forehands across the baseline? Mm-hmm. Vic used to say the same thing. It's amazing how many similarities from one person to the next. Mm-hmm. On teaching doubles, okay, play doubles with no alleys. So then there's going to be more play to the middle.
Yeah.
4 players, we do this all the time, 4 players playing doubles in one service box. There's many tennis doubles, but they're all in one service box. Mm. So their rackets are clashing. They're going for balls in the middle.
Right.
Even break it down where people are trying to volley in the alley, 2 on each side.
Yeah, I've done that. It's a great drill.
With, I'd say all of our mentors, because when how tennis boomed in the 70s and 80s, dealing with group dynamics. Peter with having people serve, come in, and then double volley. So you're serving, you come in, split step. That you're going to keep that racket head above your wrist. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to do a double volley if you drop the racket head above your wrist.
Right.
Teaching kids under 3, taught to deaf, semi-blind, the blind. His favorite challenge. Got so much altruism, so altruistic to teach prisoners.
I experienced blind tennis in Europe. I was traveling with Max Cressy and Jamie Saratani, and we all tried it. It was in Germany, and these guys had these masks, where you'd have like 10% vision or whatever, right? And you had it was purely by sound. And there were some guys that were really good at it. And we tried it, and it was tough. It was unbelievable what they could do. And it's, I don't know how much it's growing, but it's a sport. They're doing some blind tennis. Maybe.
Yeah, I think coming back to altruism, where give to others. And I do think a lot of, say a celebrity coach, a highly recognized coach, high profile, is they end up just coaching players. Even at, a club, granted the director wears many hats, they got many things to think about. Yeah. A lot of times what a tennis director will do, they've been hired because they hit the ball well, and they hit with the kids who already hit the ball well, and they farm out the work. Mm-hmm. And they don't really know how tennis is even being taught, on the court next to them, seriously. There's
not always that continuity.
Right. So to go in and be so excited about, helping a prisoner, and there, Peter shares a lot of stories about the impact tennis had on helping people get their life together. Big on racket hit skills, creative, do this, do that, tap up, tap down. And, I do think a lot of people, Vic used to say, why don't you show them how to hit it? You get little kids out there, and say, okay, bounce the ball down, bounce the ball up. But Peter would be so creative with that. You think, okay, roll the ball around the frame. But, a typical Burwash, and I know you've seen me do all sorts of things like this where, okay, get the kids work with, they all show up with several rackets, get 2 rackets, mm-hmm. and you get one in your right hand, one in your left hand, and you're jogging around the courts, with a tennis ball going from one racket face to the next. Right. And then, maybe you don't have a soccer ball, but they take a tennis ball as a soccer ball. So now they got a racket in their right hand, racket in their left hand, and they're trying to have the ball go back and forth from one racket to the next, plus dribble the soccer ball, not just kick it 20 feet ahead.
Yeah, right.
But all sorts of creative training like that. Catch a frisbee behind your back. We try to tell kids, can you run and catch a football?
Yeah. Just becoming an overall athlete, like you said.
Yeah, and it makes it fun. Yeah. Makes it fun. With teaching, our mini tennis 5. So Peter did all sorts of double hits in all his drills. Mm-hmm. Stop it like a volley. Now the ball's falling. Then you have time to let the racket go underneath.
Right.
But Peter would teach the serve, the club players. And, young kids do the same thing. Really young kids, they just put their hands up this way and over their head. But he'd have people turn their back to the net and say, now serve.
Yeah.
And what a great way not to have someone be palm up.
Exactly. You got to have a continental grip to do it.
And we tell people, and this comes from Burwash, you don't want to run backwards and have no idea how to play the ball. So one theme of Peter's was emergency shots. Then from that, I hear people say, well, the continental family, all these shots are continental. And that's not really true. Top players don't say what they do or do what they say. It's kind of like an unwritten law. Oh, no, everybody volleys continental. Yeah. And they don't. They're almost continental. Even Jose Garris, who's in charge of the USTA, he would say on the forehand volley, it's almost continental. Oh, yeah. But anytime the ball is behind you. So, we teach people to do that off the backboard. We have a shadow swing routine that people do. Mm-hmm. And we have different names for 15 different emergency shots. So, and it goes back to, Jimmy Connors. Bud Collins would give the late Bud Collins would give a lot of these specialty shots a name. So with Connors, the Bellevue, where he's from, Bellevue, Illinois, backfire, or the skyhook, the Belleville skyhook, or the Bucharest backfire with Nastasi.
We'll put up a video one of these days on that.
Yeah, but the traveling show, maybe we could just talk about that and then call it.
Yep.
Have you ever seen the traveling show?
I think I've seen some film, but not in person. Actually, I feel like I saw some. Actually, I did. In Indian Wells one year, I saw some of the traveling show.
The Tennis World, I one time was in New York, and the traveling show was at the old Roosevelt. So it's a great performance. It's like the Harlem Globetrotters of tennis. Mm-hmm. And Charlie Passerelle spoke afterwards. And Charlie was, taught by Welby Van Horn. Mm-hmm. And Charlie said, well, I didn't bring any dancing bears. So, but the only reason I mentioned that's a tough act to follow.
Yeah. The
traveling show. Then they ask the coaches, well, could you juggle? Could you do all these different things? But what we've done for the listeners, the traveling show come out and really impress people with racket skills, mm-hmm. tricks they can do with the ball. It's not just hitting the ball between your legs, but
yeah.
So we take parts of that traveling show and incorporate it into doubles. So you can put, so when people see me do this, I'm all the time going, all right, let's do a Burwash drill with, you get 4 players playing doubles, but you put them all on the service line, and then you feed from off to the side, and you show them the directionals they have to hit. So one, they know where to go. So one's going cross court, one goes down line, back cross court. So they're hitting all 4 players. The balls hit to them consecutively.
Yeah.
So then you put 2 balls in play, and then 3 balls in play. Yeah. And, you get some players, it just really helps with, everybody's moving their feet.
Yeah, quick turns.
The focus. You don't have to tell people, don't swing on your volleys.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is, so again, I've probably said that word 10 times. I should say it 10 more. It's just being creative.
Yeah. Fun too.
But, no, I think we can get more into, Peter and, PBIs, but when someone watches, what we do, and I think, we had someone recently spend a month here and said, it's just not the same. We're trying to get as much content out as possible online. But, to actually see things be done. And so where do these ideas come from?
Yeah.
And, say, for example, I have people sit on the court. Peter was always like, why the tennis coach, many times just stands right in the middle, giving a lesson to somebody who doesn't have much skill, and then they hit this coach with a ball. And then go, oh, it's all right, it's no problem, Mm-hmm. And then the person on the other side, they feel bad, they just hit the coach. And, but Peter said, well, it's really kind of dumb. You're trying to teach people to hit up the middle, and you're feeding standing in the middle.
Yeah.
But, again, Burwash drills, to have somebody sit on the court, backhand volley, put the racket above the wrist, mm-hmm. and say, okay, now they can't drop the racket above the wrist.
Yeah.
And then say, well, we don't want you to have your back all the way down. Don't let your spine touch the court. But now do a half sit-up. Mm-hmm. And you feed them a backhand volley, and the racket's up, and then they go back and forth. And
yeah.
So I do drills on a everyday basis. So someone like Don Leary, who wrote the book, The Teaching Pro, the Word Picture Method.
Yeah.
So it's really just a system of systems. Leary's not identified as one of our pillars. In our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied, we mention 100 pros. I mean, I tell people, I'd say weekly, people come in for an assessment. I tell them they need to go to on-court, off-court. One-stop shop, and you can buy all these teaching aids.
Sure.
And, Joe Denoffer's, put together a great company, but he spent so many years with Burwash. And I think so much of that creativity for teaching aids comes from not just Peter, but Peter, also, having the process where he, how he would select people to work. And, he was going to select the people that, again, it was, how's it go? It's not about you. Even when people are out there and working on their own game, it's not about you,
Yeah.
With,
So hopefully that, great first episode on Peter. We've got 5 or 6 pages or so of notes, so we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, it's it's like with most recently we spoke about Jim Lair with, and it was in the 80s. Granted, Jim has gone on and done so many more things and written so many more books, and so is Peter. But we immersed ourselves into what both of them brought to tennis.
Yeah.
And, I think federations around the world, and again, I'm critical. I don't really see it. It's unfortunate, but I don't see the leadership, say here in the U.S., who's going to take the place of the think tank, the brain drain. But I think the answer is in the question. No one needs to come and, reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. I think one of the problems is ego and greed.
You think there's ego and greed in America?
Well, in tennis teaching, I can't, 330 million people, I think there's everything in America. But when it comes down to the tennis teaching industry, I'd like to think that, 5-10% of what we do is original. And it's, John Verdi, a great pro, calls research "steal, baby, steal." Here's a great idea, and don't pretend it's your own.
Yeah. Make
it a story. If you learn something, just like the parent, the way he said to me, tennis winning is a drug, and people keep they want the drug, so they keep reinforcing how to win the wrong way. Yeah. But if you make it a story where you learn something, and who taught you that, where were you, when, how, then you're gonna have a much better chance of owning it.
Yeah.
But if you're pretending it's yours, and
I see it every day online.
Yeah, I think for what you're doing online, I think it'd be great to have we can reconnect with Peter. I know that Peter, it's been some time, but I've written all sorts of articles, and he used to get every magazine, every newspaper, and I remember he'd read an article that I've written, and he'd call me up and but yeah, let's continue more about Peter Burwash. I hope our listeners are getting something out of this. Yeah. So is where the ideas come from, and but I think too we can circle back and talk more about just the professionalism. That's where, like today, and it's really unfortunate, but yeah, some young people, they don't know what a letterhead is. And they just, they'll send you a text, thank you, instead of having a thank you card, putting it in the mail. But I would bet that the Burwash pros are still old school, and still old school that way.
Yeah, it's more of a novelty these days.
Yeah, that, and those are the things where, even if it's just you're at a tournament with a group of young kids and have them, before you drive off, go to the front desk and thank the people for working the tournament. Yeah. Thank the umpires.
Yeah.
We used to have kids write the tournament director, and I think a lot of those principles have gone away. But we'll get into more on the standards and the values. But yeah, thank you, Peter Burwash and Peter Burwash International.
No, yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Again, hopefully you're enjoying these episodes. If you get a chance, go onto iTunes and leave us a review and a rating. That'd be nice. And you can find us online at GreatBase Tennis on social media. Yada, yada, yada. We're on there. All right, everybody. We'll continue the discussion next week. Thanks for listening.
Number 32. Next time's number 33.
Yep. Till next time, adios.
Thank you.
Amigos.